Hey everyone, so the other day I made a post where you could ask me anything and there's been a lot of responses. So I've made a list of what seems to be the most popular questions and I'm going to answer as many of them as I can right now. So let's see what the first question is. You're obviously very talented on bass. Is there much room for you to improve on a technical level? Can the bass be pushed any further? So firstly, if I said that bass couldn't be pushed any further, then I think in 20 years time I'd probably look like an idiot. The bass is still actually a really young instrument. It was only invented in the 50s. So I think there's a lot that's been unexplored when it comes to bass. Do you ever have repetitive strain injury or hand issues from lots of practice/playing? So it's really rare that I get pain in my hands, and I think that's because I deliberately practice with good technique. I always try to make sure I'm pretty relaxed when I'm practicing and not tensing up a lot, because I find that's where you start getting injuries. The only time I've ever really felt any pain was when I was on tour and I hadn't really slept very much for the past week. Luckily that was pretty near the end of the tour, so I got home pretty soon after that and I just got a good amount of sleep, and that's when things started feeling better again. As a composer, what's your strategy for beating writer's block or general indecision? So in terms of beating writer's block, what I always do when I'm starting to feel uninspired and out of ideas is just listen to music that really inspires me. And then if that doesn't work, I listen to something just completely different from anything I've ever listened to before. When I hear something that really inspires me, I kind of analyze the form, the harmony, the melody, the rhythm, and I try to figure out why it feels so good. I try and break it down and incorporate some of those elements into a composition of my own. I find that this beats writer's block because it's really cool to try something new out and actually have it really work nicely in a composition. When it comes to beating general indecision, I would just say try not to be too much of a perfectionist. If you find that you're spending hours, days, or even weeks agonizing over tiny decisions in your songs, I'd say that's probably time to just move on to the next song. What's the best piece of advice you've been given, and for those wanting to learn independent bass tapping, how would you begin? So as a musician, I think the best piece of advice that I've ever heard, and I'm probably paraphrasing this to some degree, but it was from Victor Wooten, and he basically said, write music that appeals to people who have never played bass in their life. Sometimes as instrumentalists, especially, guitarists, bassists, drummers, we can get a little bit caught up in the kind of whole flexing and competitive nature of being an instrumentalist. And it means that sometimes we end up writing music that only other bassists or guitarists or drummers, whatever your instrument happens to be, like. I find it a lot more satisfying to write music that people can just enjoy even if they've never played bass before. In terms of learning tapping, I think if you're a complete beginner, I would recommend Tapestry by Grant Stinnett. I used that book when I was first learning tapping. If you're more of an intermediate or advanced player, I also have a book on tapping called Two-Handed Tapping. It comes with downloadable videos of me playing all the pieces so you can see exactly where to put your hands. There's a link below in the description where you can check that out. How was your experience with overcoming the intermediate plateau of learning bass? Did you ever feel like your playing had hit a wall or you weren't improving? Do you have any advice for players who've reached that point in their bass journey? If you're having bass lessons and you've hit a wall for a while, I'd say maybe consider trying out a different teacher. If you're teaching yourself, then I'd say there's probably something you need to change about your practicing. Maybe you need to try out some new material or just different methods of practicing. One time I hit a wall was when I was trying to learn Victor's You Can't Hold No Groove. I just couldn't really get the feel down. I didn't really know exactly what techniques he was using where. It just seemed like no matter how hard I tried, I just wasn't really improving on it. So what I actually ended up doing was I learned other stuff that involved double thumb technique, like Power by Marcus Miller, and also lots of double thumb exercises. And then a couple of years later, I came back to You Can't Hold No Groove, and my technique had actually improved a lot in that time, and then I could finally play it. I'm a classical guitarist, and yesterday was my first concerto. Congrats. Can you tell us how was your first time playing in front of a live audience, and what was it like, and maybe some tips for people like me, stage fright? So I can definitely relate to that. I used to get really nervous on stage. So here's a couple of ways you can get over stage fright. The first one might not sound that helpful, but it's probably actually the most effective way. Just keep playing on stage over and over again, even if you feel nervous. Because if you think about it, the absolute worst case scenario is that you embarrass yourself, and that's really not that bad. I think when you go on stage over and over again and realize that you're not going to die when you go up there, it slowly trains your subconscious to realize that this isn't something you need to be really nervous about. Another thing I'd suggest you try is meditation. I think a lot of what makes us nervous on stage is that we're not actually very present in the moment. We're thinking about all these other things, like what the audience might think of us or how embarrassing it might be if we mess up and stuff like that. Anything you can do to make yourself more present in the moment, whether that's meditation or just simply trying to be more present when you're practicing. All of that will help you to be able to focus on just the music when you're performing and forget about all the other external stuff, and I think that will also help with stage fright. If you had to pick an orchestral instrument to play, would it be the double bass or something else? I think I'd actually probably play the cello because it's just such a beautiful, expressive instrument, and it's kind of similar to bass, but I'd love to play something with a bow because then you can get those long, expressive phrases and they just sound so nice. What was your first bass guitar and do you still have it? So my first bass was a PV Milestone. I actually really liked it, you know, it did everything I needed it to. I don't have it with me right now, I actually gave it to my cousin. I had a stroke 2 years ago and used to be a pretty active musician. Do you know any bass players that have recovered from disabilities or have disabilities for inspiration? Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that and I wish you the best for your recovery. I think there is one really inspiring example you should look up. He's not a bassist, he's actually a jazz guitarist and his name's Pat Martino. I think it was back in 1980 or something, he had a massive seizure and they actually had to remove part of his brain. After the surgery, he had absolutely no memory of ever having played guitar or anything about his career, and he had to completely reteach himself everything. But he was definitely successful in that because he's an absolutely incredible jazz guitarist. If you listen to anything that he's played after that surgery, you'll hear that it's just incredible. I'm sure there's other examples too, but that's probably the best one I've ever heard. I have a full-time job and music is just a hobby. I play several instruments and learn to play them by myself. But with the lack of proper training and exercise, I cannot move forward. And when I watch your videos, I see perfect playing and I see the hours of hard working in the background. So do you have an advice for people like me? Should we choose one instrument, take proper lessons, or enjoy the limited playing skills as it is? So I think music can play a lot of different roles in our lives. Some people want to dedicate their whole life to it and become professionals. Other people just want to do it, you know, every now and then, have it as a hobby, and then there's everything in between as well. I would say if you want to improve but don't have very much free time, it's probably best to just pick one of those instruments and stick with that for a while. I think you'll see a lot more progress like that, and you can always come back to those other instruments later. But if you're okay with playing lots of different instruments and you don't mind improving pretty slowly, then I'd say just keep doing what you're doing. What is the importance of bass in a band? I ask that because sometimes I think in some music, I almost cannot hear the bass, why don't they cut it off? It probably has a meaning. So it's definitely true that sometimes you can't really hear the bass as a separate instrument. In some music, the bass just makes it sound more satisfying and powerful. I think that's definitely true in rock and metal, where the guitars are much more upfront and in your face, and the bass is more just kind of a feeling. The usual role of a bass player in a band is to play the lowest note of the chord, which is often called the root, and provides a solid foundation for all the other instruments to play the other notes of the chords. The bass, along with the drums, also provide the fundamental rhythm of the song. Usually the bass and the kick drum are playing similar or complementary rhythms, which give the song its pulse and heartbeat. Have you ever thought about getting a beard or a moustache? Yeah, maybe. Leave a comment if you think I should. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you're having a great summer so far, and I'll see you in the next video.